Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rechak Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Jeremiah, the 4th chapter. And as you can see, it says Judah threatened with invasion. And in this chapter, Jeremiah showed the coming destruction that the Lord has basically set up against Jerusalem, against the inhabitants of Judah, for their wickedness, right, for their stiff-necked ways. And, being that Jeremiah is hearing these things, right, he's also frightened, right, or disturbed, having being showed these things and having to go and declare it onto Israel. Okay, and so you sort of hear that sentiment, as he responds to seeing these things that the Lord is showing him, right? And you have to keep in mind as well, like realistically speaking, at his age, and really regardless of age, but when you see some of these visions coming upon your people, or the place where you dwell and so on, and the Lord is like, yeah, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And you know that there's really no way to change that, right? But you're seeing how destructive, how it is, how much death, pain, and suffering is going to come to your people. Sometimes it can be a lot. And so you'll hear the prophets express, that when sometimes as they're responding to seeing these things. So this is the book of Jeremiah, chapter 4, verse 1. If thou wilt return, O Israel, saith the Lord Yahweh, return unto me. And if thou wilt put away thine abominations out of my sight, then shalt thou not remove. So the Lord is saying that, and remember, I believe when we read in Jeremiah, was it the third? Yeah, in the 3rd chapter, in the 1st verse, it mentioned here, right, that if a man put away his wife and she go away from him and become another man's, shall he return unto her again? That land is going to be greatly polluted, right? But as you can see here, the Lord is saying, even though you've gone after these other idols, which is likened unto an adulterous woman going after other lovers, the Lord is still willing to accept you if you will return back onto him. And if you'll put away your abominations. And the abominations, mainly the Lord is really disturbed by the idols, because the idols are a starting point for a lot of the abominable acts that follow that. Okay, and not to discount other transgressions and forms of iniquity that are unlawful or abominable to the Lord. But if you look at certain acts, even like sodomy and some perverse acts, some of those end up being ritualistic, right, or required by these pseudo gods, right, these idols. So when Jake starts worshiping those idols, they start to then commit those acts as well. But the Lord is saying here, if you put those away, right, you destroy them and do away with them, not just outwardly, but inwardly as well, then you're not going to remove, meaning you're going to be stable. You're going to be sure, because the Lord is going to be with you again. And thou shalt swear, the Lord liveth, in truth, in judgment. So you'll take an oath, right, that the Lord liveth, which is to acknowledge the Most High Yahweh, the God of Israel, in truth, in judgment, and in righteousness. And the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory. All right, and this is talking about the Israelites. Okay, it says nations here, but it's really referring to Israel. Okay, because when you read in both this and all the other prophecies that go into what happens at the end when Israel becomes righteous again, the glorying in the Lord is not done by the heathen. The heathen might glorify the Lord by seeing us, but they don't glory in the Lord. He is our power, and so we glory in him. So there are times when you may see nations here, but it's really referring to Israelites. But you're at the time of this fulfillment, you have Israelites that are scattered amongst all these various nations. Okay. Verse 3. For thus saith the Lord Yahweh to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground and sow not among thorns. All right. And this is referring not to literally the physical ground, but the ground of your mind. Okay. Because what ends up happening when you sow among thorns, they choke the growth of whatever you planted. So if you liken the word of the Lord or the instruction of Yahweh Ba'asham Yahushai to a seed and your mind onto the ground, breaking it up means you stop and you listen and you take heed, right? So you open up your mind and then plant the seed to listen to the Lord. And sowing not amongst thorns, because the thorns that are going to choke out that growth are going to be the wayward ways of living, right? The things that are contrary to what the Lord requires of you that Jacob are partaking in. So in a literal sense, what the Lord is saying here through Jeremiah, or telling Jeremiah to convey to Israel, is put away the behaviors that are contrary to the ways of the Lord, because they're likened unto thorns. And so long as you continue to follow those ways, they will choke out any instruction the Lord would give you from actually flourishing within you and allowing you to turn back to the Lord again. Verse 4, circumcise yourselves to the Lord and take away the foreskins of your heart. See, so once again, it's not talking about necessarily physical circumcision, because that is something that was known in Israel, right? And they did do that. But the spiritual circumcision, or the circumcision of the mind, when he says here to take away the foreskin of your heart, the foreskin would how the foreskin covers the body part is likened on to how the iniquity or the sins of Israel were covering their mind. That's why it says your heart. And that covering of their mind was blocking them from receiving or following the ways of the Lord. So that's why he says here, right, take away that foreskin, put away these abominable behaviors and these idols, so that you may be able to receive the instruction of the Lord and turn back and follow him in sincerity and in truth. Ye men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire. So do this before the Lord runs out of patience and brings his destruction upon you like fire, and burn that none can quench it. Because when the Lord, when his word goes forth, it doesn't return to him void, as it says in the book of Isaiah, I believe the 55th chapter. So when the Lord, he basically sends you warnings via the prophets, because once he declares that judgment, he's not going to turn that back. So he forewarns you to say, do not get me to this point. All right. And the reason, like when we read up above, that the Lord was still willing to accept Israel back is because he knows very well what he can do to Israel. He knows how destructive he can be. That's why he gives you so many chances, so he doesn't have to get to that point. But if you don't take heed and the Lord does get to that point, well, there is no turning back. It says here, because of the evil of your doings. Right, so the Lord would unleash judgment upon you as a result of your wicked doings. Declare ye in Judah, and publish in Jerusalem, and say, blow ye the trumpet in the land. Cry, gather together, and say, assemble yourselves. So basically make an announcement, right? Let it be known to the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem, all right, to prepare themselves, right? Blowing the trumpet is to basically get the attention of the people and sound an alarm and tell them to gather and prepare themselves, right? Assemble yourselves, which is to gather, and let us go into the defense cities, meaning enter the fortress, right? Now, I believe you had like cities like Lachish, right? Jerusalem, and maybe a couple more that were fortress-like cities. So they were built and designed in a way to have strong walls and be fortified, so they could defend against things like a siege, or just keeping enemies out. So here they're saying, basically gather yourselves up and start running up into these defense cities, because what? the Lord is bringing an enemy, an adversary against you. Set up the standard towards Zion, retire, stay not. So flee, right? Run. And when it says that standard, that's that banner, okay, just to alert people to basically flee, and start getting ready. Stay not, so don't waste any time. For I will bring evil from the north and a great destruction. And that evil at the time was the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Now, at this time that Jeremiah is prophesying about this, right? If we look up here, when did Jeremiah begin his ministry? So roughly 627 BC, right? So right around this time, during the reign of King Josiah, if we look up here, King Josiah, we'll see here that he reigned from around 640 to 609. So during the reign of King Josiah, which Jeremiah also mentions, right around 627 on going forward, Jeremiah begins his prophecy. Now, what else is going on at this time around 627 BC, right? When we look here at the Neo-Babylonian Empire, we'll see here, actually, I'm just going to read this part right here, but it shows that they officially, beautiful, it has the information here. So Nebuchadnezzar II came into power in 605 BC here, right? But in terms of the ruling of Babylon before it started to expand, you had Nabopolassar in 626, right, BC. And that's also the time when they revolted, right? Because remember, this region here, you had the Assyrians, which they had their capital of Nineveh somewhere more north, right? And then you had Ashur and so on. And then you had Babylon south. So they had their foot over Babylon. They had control over them until Nabopolassar, which was an Assyrian, ended up revolting. Okay. So right around this time of Jeremiah beginning his ministry is around the time when the Lord started to stir up events over there in the east, to where this was the collapsing of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and the rising up of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Okay, so as Jeremiah is prophesying, up until the Babylonians make their way over here, it starts off with Nabopolassar plus, revolting, and then getting help from the Medes, and then starting to actually take down Assyria, capital by capital, until they eventually push them all the way to the west, to Carchemish, which we read about that when Josiah fought with Pharaoh Necho, right, and ended up dying in that battle. But in any case, they pushed up to Carchemish. So at this point in time, remember, Jeremiah is still prophesying, telling them, hey, the Babylonians are coming. They're coming. And they actually were. They were making their way, until eventually they came up to the doorstep of Jerusalem. All right. So I'm going to read this here a little bit. It says, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, or Second Babylonian Empire, historically known as the Chaldean Empire, was the last polity ruled by monarchs native to ancient Mesopotamia. Hear that? So, as it says, beginning with the coronation of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, in 626 BC, and being firmly established through the fall of the Assyrian Empire, which they took down in 612 BC, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Achaemenid Persian Empire in 539 BC. So that's way more into the future than we need. But I'm going to come down here and briefly just click on this revolt of Babylon. So it says, the revolt of Babylon in 626 BC, right around the time when Jeremiah begins his ministry, refers to the revolt of the general Nabopolassar and his war of independence until he successfully consolidated control of Babylonia in 620, defeating the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which ruled Babylonia for more than a century. The revolt saw the formation of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and was one of the key factors contributing to the fall of Assyria. 20 years after the revolt had begun, Nabopolassar's army and that of his ally Cyaxares of the Medes had destroyed the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So when the Lord says he is bringing an evil from the north, he quite literally was preparing that evil, forming them, and then eventually bringing them to come and bring that destruction to um, Judah. It says here, in a great destruction. Verse 7, the lion has come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. He is gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate, and thy cities shall be laid waste without inhabitant. Now, in context, this verse is referring to that evil from the north. Okay, and this was the Babylonians the Lord is bringing, particularly in Nebuchadnezzar II, because when we read here, remember, like I showed you before, Nebuchadnezzar came up right around 605 to 562, right? And it was by the time the Babylonians got to Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar II was in power because he was crown prince when his father was king. So he was sort of there with his pops until his father died, I believe in 605, and then he basically rose up, and then he led the actual interaction with Jerusalem. So the exiles of, like Ezekiel and so on and so forth, Daniel and the three holy children, which these were, I believe they had about 2 or 3 exiles before actually having besieging Jerusalem and destroying it. That was all done by Nebuchadnezzar. Now, what's also interesting is that in Daniel, the 7th chapter, it mentions it describes the Neo-Babylonian Empire rising up into power as a lion standing up, right? So, as it says, the lion has come up from his thicket, which is an analogy here. And a thicket, I believe, is like a den. Let's see what they have here. Okay, so they don't really give much in here. Let's just look it up over here. Lion's thicket. Yeah, it says here, lion's thicket can refer to a, okay, that's fine. I want to know what the thicket is. Lord have mercy. You can't just give me, all right, thicket, meaning a dense group of bushes or trees. Okay, even better. So as opposed to a den, you can imagine this. So maybe it's like a lion camouflaging in here and then popping out on your ass. So as it says, the lion has come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. Now, at this point, right, that was when Nebuchadnezzar was on his way. Remember, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was now basically dominating, right, alongside the Medes, but they were basically dominating all the nations in their path. When they got to Israel, Israel to them was just another foreign nation that they came to conquer. All right, eventually spreading to all that region. If you look up here, the the Neo-Babylonian Empire, you can see here, right, this whole entire region they basically took over. All right, so as it refers to him as the destroyer of the Gentiles, basically it's just a title that was given to him because of the position or the role that he played at this time. And it says he is gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate. So the Lord was getting ready to send him against you. And when you read in the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel was in Babylon, right, among the captives, and the Lord showed him before the Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem, like a year or two or a couple of years before. The Lord showed Ezekiel why he was going to have Nebuchadnezzar come and do that. So it says here, and thy cities shall be laid waste without an inhabitant. And this was describing the aftermath of Jerusalem after the siege, after they burnt and broke down the walls and burnt and broke down the temple. Now, this verse can also be used as like a similitude, right, in reference to Yahushua. Like sometimes you'll notice, like brothers might quote this verse here or use it in reference to Yahushua, returning, making the second return to bring destruction to this place. All right, but it's important to clarify when you bring that so that the context is still known. But as it says here, verse 8, for this gird you with sackcloth, lament and howl. So basically start going into mourning, because this is the judgment that is pronounced against you, and it's not going to change. For the fierce anger of the Lord Yahweh is not turned back from us. So the Lord is angry at you, and he's not willing to turn away that anger to let you escape from this judgment that's coming. So basically start mourning, because it's going to be bad. And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord, that the heart of the king shall perish, and the heart of the princes and the priests shall be astonished. This doesn't mean that the king's heart is going to explode or he's going to have a heart attack, like literally, although he might. But what it's referring to is that they're going to be afraid. Okay, the heart meaning their mind is going to perish. Is going to lose that strength. They're gonna be made weak and afraid. Okay, the princes, the kings, and the priests shall be astonished. So they're going to be in shock. And the prophets shall wonder, right? They're also going to be confounded. And the reason, which these prophets are referring to false prophets, because when you look into the word wonder, and as we go through the book of Jeremiah, you'll see that there were false prophets that were prophesying contrary to Jeremiah. So it says here to be astounded, to be stunned, amazed, be dumbfounded. And that's because they're not expecting this judgment that's coming. And as we read below, you'll see why, to a degree, they thought that as well. Verse 10. So the Lord is saying here, right, Jeremiah is seeing that this is going to be a bad time. Verse 10, then said I, Lord God, Yahweh, surely thou hast greatly deceived this people and Jerusalem. Because remember, the Lord is showing Jeremiah and telling him, you see this that I showed you, that's what I'm going to bring to these people. Jeremiah is responding accordingly. And he's saying, but wait, Lord, what's going on here? I know they're wicked, but, right, it says here, saying, ye shall have peace, whereas the sword reacheth unto the soul. So Jeremiah is saying, but Lord, isn't this like deceiving your people to a degree? Now, when he says, saying ye shall have peace, whereas the sword reacheth unto your soul, it's because at Jeremiah's time, remember that prior to Jeremiah, you had prophets like Isaiah, for example, and other prophets that prophesied, yes, of destruction, but they also prophesied of peace that would come to Israel, right? For example, when the Assyrians came against Jerusalem, Isaiah prophesied that the Lord would keep Israel, right? He would protect his people and they wouldn't be touched. So you could see how Jake would have in their minds, based on some of the things of peace that the prophets prophesied about Israel, even though a good portion of them didn't understand that some of those verses weren't referring to their time, but more so at the latter end. But they perceived it as, wait, but Lord, you had your prophets who prophesy in your name come and also speak peace unto us, right? Saying that we'll be ultimately good and we'll enjoy the land and we'll be taken care of. You even delivered us when the Assyrians came. But now all of a sudden you're showing me this destruction. And as he says, whereas the sword reacheth onto the soul, meaning it's right at our necks, right? What happened here, right? And also to add on to that, you also had, once again, those, as we'll get to it, prophets who were saying, no, there's not, what Jeremiah is saying is not going to be the case. We're going to have peace. Don't you remember what this prophet said? Don't you remember what that prophet said? So what are you trying to say? That they were lying, right? Verse 11, at that time shall it be said to this people and to Jerusalem, a dry wind of the high places in the wilderness toward the daughter of my people, meaning a wind, right? The Lord is like a wind is blowing past you. which when it says toward the daughter of my people, which is referring to Israel, not to fan nor to cleanse, meaning this wind that is coming isn't the kind of wind that that you're used to for like cleaning your threshing floors or winnowing. Right now, when you look here at threshing floor in the Bible, sometimes you'll see references where the Lord describes nations being blown away like the chaff. What he is referring to here was when you had the threshing floor after it was done, you would sometimes have, like you see what they're doing here, they would use these like pitchfork looking things to sort of lift up and throw up the chaff, and the wind would blow it away so they could clear the floors. Uh, and and then I also mentioned winnowing, right, which was also a process. Winnowing, and then let's do Bible. So as you can see here, right, they're once again using that to sort of throw up the chaff, and it would get blown away by the wind, and then you would have the grain remaining. Now there was, if I could find, yeah, there was like a basket like this, but there's a image that I'm looking for. I wonder if this will do. All right. Yeah. So, well, that or there's some better images, but anyway, what you can see here is basically like a little basket that's woven, right? And what they would do was they would toss up the contents in it into the air and then catch it again in the basket. And what that does is the air blows away as they toss it up in the air, it blows away the chaff off of it, and then they just catch the grain because the grain is heavier, so it's not going to get blown away by the wind. But the chaff is lighter, so that will get blown away by the wind, or like the husk. That would get, yeah. So here you go. Here's also another example. So in here, Jeremiah, well, at least what he's being shown is this wind that I'm blowing is a wind of destruction, not like your typical wind that you use to like fan or clean your threshing floors or to winnow, right? It is even a full wind from those places shall come on to me. When it says come on to me, it's really saying it's going to come from me. The Lord is going to be sending that wind, which is that of destruction. When you read in the book of Revelation, the 7th chapter, it describes the destruction as wind, right? Holding back the four winds, by referring to the angels holding back that destruction, that it should not blow upon the earth. It says here, now also will I give sentence against them, right? So now with this wind I'm bringing, I'm going to judge these people, right? Being Israel. Behold, he shall come up as clouds, once again referring on to the Babylonians led by Nebuchadnezzar. The clouds refer to the vast army that they would come with, right? There are times when the scriptures liken a large army onto a cloud, right? See, cover the land. I think Ezekiel 38. Yep, Ezekiel 38 and 9. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm, referring to Russia. Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands, meaning your armies, and many people with thee. So there's an example where clouds are representative or used metaphorically at times to represent, armies. So as it says, he shall come up as clouds, and his chariots shall be like a whirlwind, meaning they're going to be quick, right, and swift. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe, woe unto us, for we are spoiled. So Jeremiah is seeing this. He's probably seeing a whole bunch of, armies. He's hearing the horses, the hooves. He's seeing the chariots being dragged. And he's saying, shit, we're cooked, right? When he says we are spoiled, right? Like it's over. And so when he sees this, he's like, yo, like this is what's coming. As he says, "O Jerusalem, wash thine heart from wickedness, that thou mayest be saved." So drop the idol worship, the deceit, all the vain things you're doing. Drop it right now, okay? So that maybe you can possibly have a chance of escaping this. Even though the Lord has told me this is what's coming, like just it's so bad that if there's anything you can do to stand a chance, do it. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee? So how long are you going to stay in this mindset of thinking that you're right and following after your own hearts? Meanwhile, the Lord got wickedness coming. He got destruction and judgment coming against you. For a voice declareth from Dan, and publisheth affliction from Mount Ephraim. Meaning, all throughout your land, right? The sound of affliction and destruction is going to be made known. Make ye mention to the nations. Behold, publish against Jerusalem. So it's warn the surrounding nations, make it known to Jerusalem that watchers come from a far country. The watchers here are referring to the enemies of Israel, right? Those of the Babylonian army come from a far country, right? When we pulled up the map, right, from Babylon all the way to Jerusalem is far. As it says here, and give out their voice against the cities of Judah. So like they're like shouting, like a war cry, right? That they're letting out. And the NLT says, warn the surrounding nations and announce this to Jerusalem. The enemy is coming from a distant land, raising a battle cry against the towns of Judah. As keepers of a field are they against her round about. So and that's the visual of them laying siege to Jerusalem, because they would surround you to cut off your supplies and eventually starve you out. And when you're weak enough, then they would break through your walls. Because she hath rebelled against me, saith the Lord. So the Lord said, I'm doing this because they rebelled against me. Thy way and thy doings have procured these things unto thee. So as a result of you, how many times, how many prophets have I sent unto you to warn you? And what did you do each time? So because of your way, right, the way you've chosen to walk down, the path you've chosen to go down, and the evil deeds that you continually do, that is what has brought or warranted these things to come onto you. This is thy wickedness. The word wickedness here is rai, which goes into evil. So this evil is of you. You brought this upon yourself, because it is bitter, because it reacheth unto thine heart. So this wickedness is great. This judgment is painful, to the point where it's gonna reach even to your heart. It's gonna, it's gonna affect you physically and mentally. So as Jeremiah is hearing these things and seeing these things, right, his reaction is, my bowels, right? He laments, as it says, over Judah's devastation. My bowels, I am pained at my very heart. My heart maketh a noise in me. But that noise is referring to his heart beating. Because when you either get scared or you're, like distressed, your heart beats faster. I cannot hold my peace because thou hast heard, O my soul, the sound of the trumpet. So he's saying, I can't contain myself, right? As you've heard, and seen these things, referring to his soul, the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Destruction upon destruction is cried, for the whole land is spoiled. So he's seeing the land that he grew up in, right? Where he, has memories of and all those things. And he's seeing all this being about to be destroyed. Suddenly are my tents spoiled and my curtains in a moment. So just like that, the places where he grew up at, the places where he dwelt, the habitable places of the land are destroyed. And it was a scene of great destruction, because when they destroyed the land, they did exactly that. Okay, they set it on fire. People were dying, people were being killed, there were screams, just like you see in those movies when there's war and bloodshed and violence. That's what Jeremiah was seeing, and he was hearing it, and he was witnessing it. Verse 21, how long shall I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? The standard are the flags, right, of the battle. As it says here, how long must I see battle flags, or see the battle flags, and hear the trumpets of war? For my people is foolish. So now the Lord responds, and it's not, sometimes the transition isn't too clear, but you'll get it based on how it's being worded over here, right? So for example, in verse 22, in the verses above, Jeremiah is lamenting. He's like in distress. But in verse 22, this is the Lord's response. For my people is foolish. They have not known me. They are sottish children, meaning they're stupid, and they have none understanding. And you can see why the Lord says that, right? Because if I tell you that as long as as long as you listen to what I'm telling you to do, which is going to be beneficial for you, you're going to be taken care of. But if you don't, then I'm going to bring this judgment against you. And the things I ask you to do are pretty simple. But yet, for some reason, you just cannot listen to that time and time and time and time again. Then shit, what kind of people are you? It says here, they are wise to do evil. So when it comes to doing the things that I hate, when it comes to doing the wickedness that I told you not to do, you get real creative. You do it above and beyond. But to do good, you act like you have no knowledge. Like you're some elementary school kid taking a calculus class when it comes to doing righteousness. So hell yeah, I'm gonna bring this judgment upon them because the only language they understand is ass whooping. But as you can see, it says they have not known me. That's how you know it's referring to the Lord. Verse 23, I beheld the earth. Now this is back again with Jeremiah, what he is seeing, what the Lord showed him. And when he says the earth, it's Aratazah, he's referring to the land. And so he's referring to the aftermath of the destruction that he saw. It says here, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. Okay, meaning that it looked all destroyed, right? So you could see the heavens, meaning like the skies, for example, being darkened, right? Because all the smoke caused by the fire, and the land, the buildings being broken down. Remember, Jerusalem was on a hill, right? It was on a mountainous region. Okay, so the aftermath of that siege, by the time the Babylonians left, everything looked formless. It looked destroyed, looked broken down, or destitute. Verse 25, I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. Right? And once again, I mean, when there's destruction, one of the signs is if birds are there, they flee. Right? And that lets you know if you hear an explosion and there are birds there, you're going to see them fly right away. As it says, and there was no man, what it means is that majority of the people were dead or taken captive. But we know that after when the Babylonians left, they left some people in the land, right? They left like the poor and, the people that they didn't consider to be, too valuable to take. They left them to basically till the land. And then they left Gedaliah as like the overseer of them. Verse 26, I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord Yahweh and by his fierce anger. So he saw the wrath of the Lord in the destruction that the Babylonians brought, at least as he was shown. That's why he mentions this fruitful place that was once filled with people, children, land, sheep, oxen. You pass here in the morning, such and such is plowing his field. Over here, these shepherds are feeding their flocks, and so on. And all of that is now destroyed, gone. Right? All the cities are broken. And this was at the presence of the Lord, because he was angry. And his presence was with the Babylonians to bring that destruction. But now when Jeremiah is seeing this, what he's saying here hadn't happened at the point where he was seeing it. It happened in the vision. He saw it. So that's why he's describing that. All right. But it's something that as we get to the latter chapters of Jeremiah, you'll see it actually took place. For thus hath the Lord Yahweh said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet will I not make a full end. So the Lord brought great destruction, but he didn't completely annihilate us, right? And he didn't completely eradicate the land, as I mentioned before. But it was bad enough to leave an impact. For this shall the earth mourn, and the heavens above be black, because I have spoken it, I have purposed it, and this is the Lord speaking, by the way, and I will not repent. neither will I turn back from it. So the Lord is saying, this is the judgment I've pronounced against this place. This is what I've intended to do, and I'm not going to change my mind or let you off the hook. Not this time. The whole city shall flee from the noise of the horsemen and bowmen. They shall run. They shall go into thickets. Right? They're going to try to hide in bushes. They're going to try to hide, anywhere safe. It said, and climb up upon the rocks, right, into different caves and dens and places where they can hide. Every city shall be forsaken, and not a man shall dwell therein. So you have people that, when this happened, people run either into a defense city or they try to just book it all down outright. Verse 30, and when thou art spoiled, what wilt thou do? See, so the Lord is saying, so when I bring this upon you, this destruction, what are you going to do then? Though thou clothest thyself, so now he likens them onto this adulterous woman once again, who basically beautifies herself to attract lovers. But when the Lord brings this judgment upon them, she's going to realize, in a painful realization, that none of them are going to be there for her. The lovers being these nations that Israel tried to join themselves to, and by association, their idols. Though thou clothest thyself with crimson, right, red, though thou deckest thyself or deckest thee with ornaments of gold, though thou rentest thy face with painting, today we know that it's makeup, in vain shalt thou make thyself fair, beautiful. So you're making yourself look beautiful in vain. Thy lovers will despise thee, they will seek thy life. So these very same nations you seek to entice, to form an alliance with, to gain help from, they're going to be the ones to turn on you. Guess what? The Assyrians that at one point you tried to be in league with, they're the same people who were, as we read up above, or read in the history of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, they were the ruling class of the Babylonians that came against you, or at least that the Lord would bring against you. And when you actually go into the history, at the very end, Zedekiah, who was the last king or the last ruler in Judah before it was completely destroyed, he trusted in Egypt, gained false confidence in Egypt, thinking that when the Babylonians came, because he was paying tribute to Nebuchadnezzar, but he stopped and revolted. And when he rebelled, he thought he had the support of Egypt. Guess what? When the Babylonians came, them Egyptians were not there. They were likened unto that reed that if you lean upon, pierceth and even goes through your hand. That's exactly what they were. Verse 31, for I have heard a voice of a woman in travail, and the anguish of her that bringeth forth her first child. So this is it's symbolic, right? But it's referring on to the screams and the agony and the pain of Israel, the lamentations of Israel, which is likened unto a woman going through labor. As it says, bringing forth her first child, because she's never experienced that before. So it's going to be a lot of pain for her. The voice of the daughter of Zion that bewaileth herself, that spreadeth her hands, saying, woe is me now, meaning destruction upon me. She's in pain. For my soul is wearied because of murderers. Because during this judgment that the Lord was going to bring, there was going to be a lot of bloodshed. Men, women, children, they were all going to get that work. And so here, Jeremiah is mentioning here that he basically, what this would look like in a vision is like, you're looking to your right, you see, women screaming, please, please, don't kill my child, whatever. And then they don't care. They kill them. You hear screams on the right. You hear screams on the left. You hear people, priests, kings, rulers running around, screaming, seeing that they're hopeless, crying out even unto the Lord, but all to no avail, as they witness their homeland being destroyed and them being taken captive while their loved ones are also put to death. And you get the scene. So that brings us to the end of the book of Jeremiah, the 4th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.